Hey guys, so if you've watched my channel for a long time, you've seen that I've had a couple feuds with this Democratic Socialist 01 fellow in the past before, and I've more than exposed him for his intellectual dishonesty, having the argumentative ethics of an autistic 5-year-old, lying so blatantly that your claims can be debunked with the first few minutes of research into the subject, and his targeting behavior towards critics, myself not being an exception. You'll notice most of my videos have their ratings disabled on him. But anyway, a few examples of this targeting behavior will be cited in more detail in the description. Quite simply, he's the biggest hack on all of YouTube. Yes, even worse than Right Wing Watch. So why return, you might ask? Well, because it's just so goddamn funny to watch him get triggered by me. And because he recently shat out this video, which is just so bad I cannot help myself.
You see, in his world, Antifa, rowdy college students, and the modern Democratic Party are fascist. However, General Franco, an admirer and ally of both Hitler and Mussolini, is just an authoritarian Catholic.
Austrofascism openly rejected, quote, liberal capitalism and styled its government after the ideology of Giovanni Gentile, which, as explained later in this video, is just a form of socialism which seeks to centralize ownership of the means of production behind the state and rejects class-based identity politics in favor of nationalist identity politics. For instance, the government of Austria developed state-sponsored worker cooperatives in place of the top-down business model that socialists hate so much, and much like Nazi Germany, the fascists installed state-run trade unions to handle the now fully nationalized industry. So while Dinesh D'Souza is wrong, you most certainly are not right.
That's right, a young student at Berkeley who was attempting to stop the vicious bully Milo Yiannopoulos from speaking and harassing students.
Justine Kramer? Have any of you come into contact with this person? There's a quote-unquote non-binary trans... You're not laughing now, are you? You know him. Quote-unquote non-binary trans woman forced his way into the women's locker rooms this year. Who knows about this story? Any of you? Let's see, you don't even read your own student media. He got into the women's room the way liberals always operate, using the government and the courts to weasel their way where they don't belong. In this case, he made a Title IX complaint. Title IX is a set of rules to protect women on campus, effectively. It's couched in the language of equality, but it's really about women, which under normal circumstances would be fine, except for how it's implemented. Now, it is used to put men into women's bathrooms.
So, in the eyes of DemSoc01 here, what passes as harassment is something so mundane as showing a picture from a national news story of someone and expressing disagreement for something that they did, and harassment somehow equals fascism. Unsurprising, considering that we're talking about the same guy who responds to a graphic I presented in a video responding to him, displaying factual points and dismissing it as just a meme and completely ignoring the point.
Is a fascist, whilst General Franco is not, because conservatives like him.
I don't think any of them have ever said that they like him or support any of his policies. You know, when you make claims which rely on real-world evidence and aren't entirely logical arguments, you need these little things called facts and citations. I know it's a tough thing, but you cannot just present something and then cram a bunch of random shit you made up into it to distort what you've actually presented into an ideological and nonsensical mess. All you've presented is that Dinesh D'Souza is wrong about Austrofascism as an ideology, and somehow from that you get all conservatives support the Austrofascist ideology. Does not make any sense any way you slice it.
So welcome to the crazy world of Dinesh D'Souza.
He's a fascist. For decades, this has been a favorite smear of the left aimed at those on the right. Every Republican president, for that matter, virtually every Republican, since the 1970s has been called a fascist, now more than ever.
D'Souza should have called his video, "I know you are, but what am I?"
The irony is fucking astonishing. On top of that being exactly what you are doing in this video, one of the only quote-unquote arguments you have in response to criticism is to baselessly accuse everyone of things which you have been criticized for as a means to deflect criticism.
He hates the fact that most historians consider fascism a right-wing ideology.
Facts are not determined by consensus. Facts are determined by what actually happened, regardless of what revisionist historians have to say about it, which is why your next statement is nothing more than Sargon's Law brand psychological projection.
Fortunately, history does not care about his feelings.
This label is based on the idea that fascism is a phenomenon of the political right. The left says it is, and some self-styled white supremacists and neo-Nazis embrace the label. But are they correct?
Yes.
Nope.
If you look at the different versions of fascism in power, you will find that they shared a number of characteristics that puts them on the far right of the political spectrum. For example, all fascist governments sought an alliance with the right-wing establishment. In Italy, Mussolini came to power with the support of Italian capitalists such as the Peroni brothers.
So, your evidence for fascists being far right is just to redefine things they've done as capitalist and brand people who supported them as capitalists, despite them not being even remotely capitalist in ideology, then claim fascists were far right, even though everything they stood for and advocated for was expressly against free market economics and was based on creating economic egalitarianism through state power. This is why the internet laughs at you. And before you move on to the second phase of this extremely dishonest tactic and claim that I'm creating a no true Scotsman fallacy, I'm not. You have created a straw man of what capitalism is, and I am merely correcting your mistake. In order for it to be a no true Scotsman, your cited example would have to actually be what capitalists advocate for. But in reality, what you are citing is an example of private businesses donating or lobbying to elect politicians who they think will use state power to manipulate the market in their favor through the use of regulations or other influences on the market, something which capitalists directly oppose and what is actually known as corporatism. Also, the notion that private businesses are all capitalist in ideology is just complete nonsense. Private businesses do not have an ideology. Private businesses will only make decisions based on what will affect their profits, which is precisely why, for instance, in the United States, big corporations are always lobbying for regulations and donating to politicians who claim that they want to create more regulations and more government influence in the market. And lobbyists have historically been known to always lobby behind the side which wants to monopolize the market more by installing more regulations, both Republican and Democrat.
And conservatives like King Victor Emmanuel III. In Germany, Hitler was appointed Chancellor by the conservative general Paul von Hindenburg, as well as being supported by Franz von Papen and Alfred Huckenberg, the latter being the leader of Germany's Conservative Party.
And while the Nazis were in power, they nationalized Germany's entire economy, gave control of their entire workforce to a labor union they installed known as the German Labor Front, and if you read the National Socialist Party manifesto, point 7 is to nationalize all of Germany's food and ration it through the state to their citizens. Point 10 is to force everyone to work in positions decided by the state. Point 11 is to prohibit all non-labor-based income. Point 13 is to appropriate and nationalize all corporations. Point 18 is to punish all crimes against what the German government deemed to be common interest with the death penalty. I could go on, but I think I've more than established my point with just what I've presented. You and all other socialists would absolutely love this manifesto if it didn't have National Socialist in the title. And these are all things which the Nazis did or were planning on doing directly after the war.
In addition, Hitler was backed by German capitalists.
Mr. Strawman, give me a break.
Such as Friedrich Flick and Emil Kurdoff. In Spain, Franco was supported by the same type of people, landowners, industrialists, royalists, and conservatives in general.
And Franco did exactly the same thing that Dollfuss, Hitler, or all the other fascists did. Your refutation to these claims being, oh, they were backed by businesses, is pathetic and ignores all historical fact.
Now, who were the economic winners and losers under fascism? The winners were the capitalists.
Because I redefined what it means for something to be capitalist, and if you disagree with me, that's a no true Scotsman. Durr!
The losers were the workers. In Nazi Germany, capital's share of the national income increased, whilst the workers' share of the national income dropped. In the US, it was the opposite. FDR's New Deal policy led to the workers' share of the national income increasing, and capital's share decreasing.
Hitler did not become Germany's chancellor until 1933, even though the rise of the German economy's capital share started in 1930, which means that Hitler rising to power has nothing to do with the German economy's increasing capital share, as there's no correlation between the two events. As for the U.S. economy, the graph you've presented conveys exactly the opposite of the message that you think it does, because there is a large increase in capital share directly following FDR getting into office and implementing the New Deal. Now, as for what FDR actually did to the economy, well, let's just say the man had the Treasury Department forcefully confiscate everyone's gold, which is the only asset people were actually trading with at the time during one of the worst economic depressions in history, which were directly caused by Keynesian economic policies, which is what FDR implemented. To say that the U.S.'s economy was doing better under FDR's Keynesian economic model is a complete load of horseshit. But let's say for the sake of argument that this is true, that Germany's capital share increased while the U.S.'s labor share increased. Income inequality is meaningless, since capital is not a static figure, but is rather a constantly expanding figure relative to the size of the market, meaning that one group, say the 1% or the bourgeoisie, having more money than everyone else is completely meaningless, since they are not hoarding money from everyone else. No one is losing money because they have money. So arguing over inequality of income is just completely meaningless.
So yes, capitalism was doing far better in the Third Reich than it was in the US. In fascist Italy, workers' living standards declined whilst the profits for Italian industrialists massively increased.
Fascist Italy also implemented a progressive tax, heavily regulated all business, nationalized most businesses, gave labor unions influence over the market on an institutional level, and seized all of the property from groups the Italian government deemed to be detrimental to the poor. So what you're telling me is that socialist, progressive, trade unionist policies destroy economies? Awfully strange for a socialist to be making that point and destroying their own argument like this, but I forget, we're talking about Democratic Socialist 01 here. Most socialists at least have the self-awareness to think about the points that they're making, and to not just shovel random tidbits they think make them sound good, but in reality prove the point of their opponents. I mean, don't get me wrong, typical arguments from them aren't very good by any means, but holy shit.
Fascism in Spain, of course, led to the restoration of capitalism and the return of the landowners after the Spanish Republic was...
Absolutely no citation for this claim, but it wouldn't matter even if there was, because, as noted, Franco was a strong supporter of regulation, nationalizing the entire Spanish economy and putting a branch of the state in charge of distribution of the means of production. This claim that the writing is making is debunked by historical evidence.
...was defeated. Fascist economies were characterized by private ownership of the means of production, high profits and low wages.
I don't even know if I should continue at this point, because I've completely destroyed all of this poor thing's arguments already, and we're not even past the first point. But for entertainment's sake, let's go for at least 2 more.
An economic system that was held up by a state apparatus that brutally repressed trade unions and other socialist organizations.
Wrong, 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 wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong. You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong.
Now we come to social policy. All 3 fascist regimes were conservative.
Well, you're actually right about this point, and I'm not going to contest it with you, but as we both know, the left-right political dichotomy is not determined by social stance, it's determined by one's economics, right being free markets, and left being market egalitarianism. A society's social stance has nothing to do with their economics, as we can see by the fact that fascist regimes were incredibly socially conservative while being remarkably left-wing.
We have to ask what fascism really means. What is its underlying ideology? Where does it even come from? These are not easy questions to answer. We know the name of the philosopher of capitalism, Adam Smith.
Whilst Adam Smith came up with the idea that a country's wealth should be measured on productivity rather than how much gold a nation has in its treasury, it would be incorrect to present him as the one and only philosopher of capitalism. We need to remember that the main elements of capitalism are the private ownership of the means of production, wage labor, commodity production, and exchange.
I mean, if you completely ignore what capitalists actually advocate for and how capitalism is defined, then sure. Well, his arguments from here are just going to be much of the same, and it would be boring if I continued. I mean, it'd be like a giant cat playing with a corpse. I mean, it's just overkill.